why aren't the United States and India closer allies?
Yeah, I think a lot of Americans have this question. A lot of my friends ask me about this as well. It seems like a natural fit. And I think there's a lot of natural fit elements there. But like every other part of Indian politics, you have to go back into history. I think the first point of contention is around the independence era. And back then, a lot of Indian founders, they basically believe that, hey, capitalism equals colonialism. And what that meant was that, okay, what are we going to do instead? And it ended up being socialism that they started to go closer to. Fabian socialism, especially. And India's first PM, Nehru, he was very fond of this idea. So from the get-go, India and America kind of had a clash on economic ideas. And I think back then, that was really big, communism and Marxism and everything. It was a real ideological fissure. So a lot of India's intellectuals and a lot of their freedom fighters, they didn't really see eye to eye with America at that point. There were some like Ambedkar and Rajaji and kind of Patel. Some of these were more capitalist bent, but they didn't really get into the inner circle of power as much as time went on. It was a lot more socialist people and eventually Marxists who became a lot more powerful within the Indian establishment and the Indian government. So I think that's the first kind of base level of, hey, what's going on here? But the real breaker, I guess, or the real breaking point would be in 1971. And during this time, Pakistan was divided, West Pakistan, which you can see today, and East Pakistan, which is Bangladesh today. So there was an ethnic rivalry there. West Pakistan had a different group of ethnicities than East Pakistan, which is mostly Bengali people. And also the Bengali people, or these people in East Pakistan, one, they had a high percentage of Hindus who lived there. And secondly, their culture was very, I guess, more Hindu-esque at that point. West Pakistan did like a Islamization campaign a little bit before and even since independence. But East Pakistan, you see a lot of more cultural markers that you would see in India, especially the western part of Bengal, which is in India. It was very indistinguishable on multiple fronts. So with this, I guess there's a justification of ethnic and that, religious casus belli, you could say. So the West Pakistani army came into East Pakistan and started, doing military action. But I think what really made them involved was a huge refugee crisis happened, where a lot of people from East Pakistan, these Bengalis, especially these Hindu Bengalis, they started flooding into India, and India started to have some more economic woes. So at that point, you could see that the Indian government decided to get involved. It was a pretty easy affair overall. I think the war itself went along pretty quickly. India won. East Pakistan was freed into Bangladesh. And the Indian government, especially Indira Gandhi and just the Indian military personnel, Indira Gandhi was the PM at that time, the prime minister. They kind of wanted to go for the jugular, at least elements in the Indian establishment. So they saw that they easily defeated the Pakistani army because it was very stretched out. There's thousands of miles in between West and East Pakistan. They had a bunch of people as prisoners of war, I think around 90,000. So they were in a sweet spot. And they decided, hey, let's go finish off, Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Let's go even deeper into Pakistan itself. Let's see if we could capture Lahore. Let's see how deep we could really, get this conflict and maybe solve this problem of ours.
Between 1950 and 2000, the U.S. sent about $25 billion worth of aid to India, as much or more than any other entity. So that's like another, back to the shorthand of like American things, like, well, we gave them money, why wouldn't they be aligned with us? But when you kind of nip in the bud, maybe more than nip in the bud, but, limit one of their biggest geopolitical objectives, like those things kind of at least cancel out, if not cause problems for you.
I think particularly after the fall of the USSR, early 90s, and then 1991, India committed to capitalism. It was kind of forced to do an economic liberalization by the IMF. So it became a lot more capitalistic. It opened up. And I know America put some sanctions on India when they did nuclear tests, but Clinton quickly kind of did his own personal touch and kind of mended some ties. At least he started the mend, we could say. Bush, Obama, and Trump, all three of them, I would say, the ties got better successively and on a pretty steady path. There was a nuclear deal with Bush, Obama. I think generally he just had good relations with India. Even when Modi came, I think he wrote a Time op-ed for him, which is crazy when you think about it now. But, once Trump came, him and Modi got along very well for whatever reason. And, I think that's where you see a lot of these natural relations happen. India and America, they're very both diverse, they're pluralistic, they're tolerant, they're secular, they're democracies. It's a natural fit. It's the world's oldest and the largest democracy. So you see all of that coming into play. A lot of diaspora came in as well. So many relations. So in part two, you really see, hey, a lot of the plus sides. And I think a lot of trade also, a lot of tech sharing, defense deals, energy. I think everything positive that could have happened, I mean, a lot of it did. Part three, though, and I guess this is the most controversial, and this is the most recent. I think as Biden came, and I don't really blame Biden for this personally. I think he would have been a continuation of a lot of the, general bipartisan sentiment. I think him personally, he probably was towards that. But we know the administration had a bunch of, just rough edges and just a lot of stuff going on in the background. From the Indian point of view, what they see is when Biden first came on the stage, hey, it was pretty good for them. Right before, though, I think Modi may have made a slight mistake. He campaigned with Donald Trump in, I think, Texas. So they did a joint event together with the diaspora. This was in the middle of the election. I think this was 2020. Yeah, 2020. And they did I don't know if you could call it a campaign event, but I mean, it was a campaign event, honestly. I think that ticked off a lot of the Democratic establishment. It was definitely a risky calculation that didn't work, but that was a big, I think that might have poisoned some of the well. But even then, I believe when Biden came to power, there was still a lot of people who, generally they saw it as business as usual continue. Maybe a few things might happen, but whatever.
So looking at I guess, then India in the context of this escalating U.S.-China rivalry, there's potential military flashpoints, there's economic and trade wars. How do they look at that dynamic? Because the other kind of simplistic, reductive view is every time there's a BRICS summit, people will write these headlines of like, they're all conspiring to take down the West and the U.S. is in trouble. And I see that, and like my, superficial understanding is like, it's China and India that have had like border disputes that have actually like turned violent, right? Like
Exactly.
I'm not so sure that these are just the best buddies ever, but can you kind of contextualize how India views the escalating U.S.-China rivalry?
I think in, that part two era, especially say Obama and the Trump era, India was completely in America's camp. I think there was a period of trying to have a rapprochement with Xi Jinping. I think Xi was invited to India. Him and Modi did some, photo shoots. They exchanged some ideas. He toured around some temples. So it looked like, hey, there's might be some potential. But I think shortly after, there were some trade disputes. I think TikTok got banned. And around the same time, obviously, there were the Himalayan disputes where, Indian soldiers died, Chinese soldiers died. So that's a whole new level of conflict. There's two real, I guess, again, two breaking points that we see here that really has made India thaw its relationship with China and start to, balance towards it now and try to do, a reset of ties. One is the Indian Lok Sabha elections, which are the parliamentary elections. So that's how, Prime Minister Modi gets elected. And it's basically like a presidential election equivalent. So the BJP won, and most people expected the BJP to win, but they expected it to win with a much bigger, victory margin. And there's various ways you could parse why that didn't happen. Some of them are economic. Some of them are, cultural related, especially caste or region related. But one thing that Indians start to get really wary of is recently, I think on the campaign, the battle was basically between the idea of a centralized India versus a decentralized India. And a decentralized India means, hey, things like caste are more important. Things like regionalism are more important. And a lot of those things kind of threaten, this idea of a united India. And this centralizing idea of India, I think that's a key point of Modi's, regime, that's what he wants to do. That's one of his goals, to centralize India. So you start to see this right after the election with the tally down. What the BJP started to do is first through lower level people, usually like, two-bit Twitter celebrities and just lower-level officials. They would start to blame the U.S. for election interference. And one of the things they would blame them for is these AI videos that start to release, and they would release and inflame tensions around caste, around regionalism. And they would also link this back to things that the opposition members said. And these opposition members, a lot of times they would take trips to the US and then they would come back and start parodying similar stuff that you see in American academia or the New York Times and stuff. So people started to connect dots. And I know I'm getting into conspiratorial territory here, but this is what people actually believe.
Yeah.
And I think they just credence to this. And I could go into this later. But anyways, they started to accuse the American government, not through super official channels, but they start to escalate. Like, hey, these people interfered. This was election interference, XYZ. Once Trump got elected, actually, right before Trump, there's the second thing, the kind of 1-2 punch. In Bangladesh, the prime minister, Sheikh Hasina, she ruled, I think, for almost 2 decades, or at least a very long time. She was kind of autocratic. They had elections, but she would do autocratic stuff. And I think that pissed off a lot of Bangladeshis. So there's an organic element to this regime change or revolution that happened in Bangladesh. However, again, the Indian government, the way they saw it, is that a lot of this was through stuff like aid or American interference. And the guy who became the caretaker PM, I think his name is Muhammad Yunus. He has connections with the Clinton Global Initiative. He had some pictures with Biden that didn't go so well. They seem really friendly. They are excited about Trump, but they're very stung by what happened recently. And they want to hedge their bets with China. So even today, I think the Chinese foreign minister and the Indian foreign secretary, they held a meet. And they are trying to, thaw a lot of ties or mend ties. And I guess the last thing I'll say about this, a lot of Indians, because of the Himalayan clashes, they have animosity towards China, as well as prior wars. But I think this especially, the Himalayan clashes and the actual, soldiers dying and there being this type of conflict, they have animosity towards China. They're starting to look at China and be like, hey, maybe we should start taking inspiration from them versus America. That being said, I think Indians still view America in a very positive light in general. Like if America offers Indians to come to America, most Indians are going to come. So it's this very complex thing that's becoming even more complex. I think there's kind of, a foot in each side now. More towards America for sure, but there's a thawing that's happening for sure with China.